Hi guys. So my friend suggested that I try out different locations in my house. So here we are. If you're trying to figure out what's in the bookshelves, they were my dad's. He was really into politics and the Beatles. So all right. So in this video, we'll talk a little bit about stereotypes, specifically stereotype formation. Stereotypes are the cognitive component of group-based attitudes. They are the ideas and beliefs surrounding groups of people. But where do these cognitions originate? How do we acquire these beliefs? They can come from a variety of sources. So read in your chapter about normative influence. One important source of social influence is the media. We likely acquire a variety of beliefs, including biased beliefs about groups, from the media at a very early age. An interesting cognitive theory is that we may be particularly prone to developing beliefs about outgroups due to what's called the illusory correlation effect or the illusory covariation effect. According to illusory correlation, at times we may be almost overly sensitive or hypersensitive to correlation, to the point that we perceive correlations that don't actually exist. We detect false connections between events. So we think that two events or ideas correlate or covary when in fact they are independent and related only through coincidence or not at all. This is one explanation for superstitions. We think that wearing our lucky socks is correlated with our favorite team winning the game, when in fact no relationship exists between these two events. Hamilton and Gifford argued that illusory correlation may help to explain the formation of some negative stereotypes. Participants in this particular study were presented with a series of pieces of information about members of Group A and members of Group B. Group A included 26 people, and Group B included only 13. So Group B is our statistical minority. There are fewer of them, half as many compared to Group A. Overall, participants received 27 positive statements and only 12 negative statements. So good statements far outweighed bad statements. If you notice though, they learned 18 good things about Group A and only 9 good things about Group B. But that's just because they received more information overall about Group A. So more positive and more negative statements about Group A because there's more members of Group A. After all, there are twice as many of them, right? So they're getting more information overall. The ratio of positive to negative facts for each group was exactly the same, 9-4. So it wasn't that Group A was better than Group B, it was just that there were more of them. And so after receiving all of this information, participants were given a recall test to measure how much information they remembered about each group. We should see the pattern of recall that matches the graph here on our left, that people remember more information about Group A overall because they learned more information about Group A, but that the ratio of good to bad characteristics remembered for each group is the same, right? With good outweighing the bad for each group. Instead, what Hamilton and Gifford found was the graph on the right, that participants remembered disproportionately more bad facts or negative pieces of information about Group B than was justified by the information that was provided. That participants seemed to associate Group B with the negative information and actually inflate the degree to which Group B was connected to the negative information. So it's believed that information that was less frequent or more rare drew attention. Group B members were more rare, there were fewer of them, and overall, there were fewer negative statements. These rare events drew attention, And people had a tendency to pair them together, to believe that somehow these rare events were connected, when in fact they were not. And so the theory is that this could play out in the real world in terms of how we attend to information and the types of beliefs that we form. And so I try to think of, has there been a time when I have been guilty of the illusory correlation? I actually had a conversation with a colleague that I used to have. She happened to mention that her husband was Australian. And I was like, oh my goodness, he's Australian. I can't believe that. How exciting. And she was very confused about why I was so excited after learning this information that her husband was Australian. And I kind of reflected and was trying to explain it to her, and I realized as I was telling her that I was admitting to this illusory correlation. I had in my mind formed a connection that was false between being Australian and being incredibly attractive. And this is because likely these two rare events just happened to coincide just coincidentally, right, on really only 2 occasions. And I just paired those two together, right, and thought that all Australian men were highly attractive. So it just so happened that, I had met very few people from Australia, and it really stands out. They have the accent. In Texas, it's not that often that you meet someone who's Australian. And so I really took note of that. And also, it's somewhat rare to meet incredibly handsome men, right? And when you do, it kind of stands out, right? It captures your attention. It just so happened that the 2 Australians that I had met were incredibly handsome. And I just formed this illusory correlation in my mind. I formed this belief that Australian men were significantly, substantially more attractive than men from other regions. So that's just my personal example. Maybe you can think of other instances when you take a note of relatively rare or infrequent events and pair those together to form these false or biased beliefs. If you think about our confirmation bias that we talked about at the very beginning of the semester, think about how this could exacerbate this effect, that once that belief is formed, it could influence the type of information that we then pay attention to and commit to memory. Right? So now we will be more sensitive to instances that confirm this belief after it's been formed than evidence that contradicts it. And so these illusory correlations, these false beliefs may persist even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, overwhelming evidence that these two things are not connected, that this belief or this stereotype is false.